Well, as people keep filtering in, we're gonna get started. And good morning, everyone. It's a wonderful Monday morning. Hopefully, everyone is bright-eyed and bushy-tailed for this wonderful week ahead. And welcome to NIRSA's Idea in Motions webinar series. Today, we are talking about the space to be yourself. We're going to explore the power of authentic invitations in campus rec outside of traditional marketing that help students feel like they belong in our programs and spaces. We're going to talk a little bit quickly about the format. It's hopefully a little bit different as we want to focus on conversation, storytelling, and lived experiences, and less of a show and tell approach. And I think with our guests, we're going to have some delightful conversation. Actually, I probably should do this now. We're going to give the advisory that we promise to keep it real and share personal stories, which may lead to the utilization of an educated but robust vocabulary. And that's directed at Cybbi. And with that, we're going to start with, we also encourage you to use the chat. We won't necessarily go to the chat for any questions unless there's something really salient or impactful that we think will add to the conversation, but please feel free to use the chat to share with your colleagues and comments. If there are any questions for any of the panelists that we don't get to, we will look at the chat later and make sure we get those to the right people and make sure any questions are addressed. So we'll start off. I'm Marc Iturriaga. I have over 20 years experience building inclusive programs and communities through my work in senior leadership roles at several institutions in student affairs, campus recreation, and community development. I started Bonobo Consulting to help organizations shift focus from systems to people, fostering belonging where everyone feels invited, welcome, and included. And that's really the focus of this webinar series is kind of looking at that idea of belonging. And so I'm really excited to introduce our NIRSA friends. We're going to start off with Cybbi. Cybbi Barton is currently the program manager for club sports and esports at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. When Cybbi isn't shaping the leaders and the best, she's usually fired up about one or a combination of the following things: the United States women's national team, soccer, and I believe that's where I learned the term LFG. When her students do great things, she's excited about women in sports, women in politics, women in general, movies with meaning, getting hype when other people are getting hype, and educating folks on social justice the best way she can. Cybbi knows how to include people in the conversations, enabling them to express their thoughts and feelings and making it safe for everyone to do the same. Our second friend is Will Trent, who actually was the inspiration for this webinar series. And Will currently resides in Blacksburg, Virginia, where he serves as the Associate Director of Admin for Virginia Tech Recreational Sports. He has 7 years of collegiate rec experience between roles at Duke University, James Madison University, UNC Chapel Hill, and Virginia Tech. In his spare time, you can catch Will flying his drone, going for a run, or cooking up culinary heat under the alias Chef Willie T. His favorite TV character is Michael Scott, and he does in fact believe pineapple belongs on pizza, and Cybbi adamantly disagrees with that. And finally, we have Scott Flickinger, where most people probably know him on social media as Flick Flack Sees and Flick Flack Says and Flick Flack Does and Flick Flack Plays. He is the Robert D. Kennedy 54 Director of Intramural Sports and Building Director of the Noyes Community and Recreation Center at Cornell University. He has previously worked at Boston University, Ithaca College, and Bucknell University in intramural sports and clubs professional roles. Scott started his career as an intramural sports official in rec sports at Ohio State University, where the environment created by his fellow peers and professional staff made a lasting impact and helped guide him to campus recreation. So welcome, my NIRSA friends. So one of the reasons the three of them were invited for me was because of their roles that I've seen in NIRSA through social media. And that really sparked my kind of intrigue and interest in the idea of invitation. And, you know, we'll probably touch a lot about the roles that they do. You know, and again, this is kind of that unofficial things that they do for NIRSA. And so what really inspired this idea was, for the longest time, I've been concerned about, we have done welcoming so well in campus rec. That is kind of where we, you know, have our bread and butter, that when people arrive into our spaces, we're very welcoming and inclusive and bring people in and we share that warmth. And the challenge that I've seen over the last, well, through my whole career is that idea of the invitation. And I'm not sure we do the greatest job of inviting our students into our spaces where they feel like they can be their authentic selves. And that's really where I think the three guests today shine, is that I don't know of three more authentic individuals who show up with their authentic selves and are brave and confident and vulnerable to be able to share who they are, what they believe, and how that becomes infectious with regards to their invitation. So to start off, I actually want to know what's important to you guys right now. Sorry, and I see already I used guys. I got to stop that. What are you folks interested in right now? What's important to you, Cybbi? What's going on in your life that you feel is important besides playing Switch with 13-year-olds?
Well, first off, you could try y'all on for size. Y'all. I do like esports. Thanks, Marc. That's really important to me. And just last night, I was telling some folks earlier today, I was in a Fortnite squad with like 13-year-olds, and there were like a bunch of girls, and I was like, this is dope. Like little girls gaming, I'm all about it. So we started chatting, and then we started talking about, hey, like Black Lives Matter, who are y'all voting for? Even though they can't vote, like, you know, just trying to engage that conversation. And then talking about what's like important to them, and they just want to have fun. And so I think that was just a fun thing that happened, but it's also what I care about now. And I think during this period of time with everything going on, I do think a lot of times we downplay it in some ways, like, yeah, we're going through a pandemic and it sucks, but I don't know if people are realizing how much of an impact this pandemic is. And then along with that, we have compacted the Black Lives Matter movement, and there's a lot of really heavy and intense things that are happening right now, and we're expected to continue to work from home. Nothing changes. You're changing your programming. So I think I'm being very thoughtful about that right now, and how I can contribute to countering that or making life feel a little bit better, even though it is shitty and it's going to be that way, and for a long time. And I think it's okay to acknowledge that and accept that. But how are we helping each other as a community get through each single day? Because that is extremely important, just to help someone get through the day. So that's kind of what's top of mind for me.
And I thought it was really cool where you talked about earlier about the Switch, where you were talking to those 13-year-old girls about Black Lives Matter, and that's awesome. Using all the platforms available to us, that doesn't always have to be so formal. Scott, what about you? What's important to you these days? Well, besides the fact that Scott is he was always a dad, but he's a new dad.
New dad number 2. So that is pretty much what's important to me nowadays, is my family. And my daughter, Lillian, was born a little over a month ago, so she's already a month old. And right now, I guess before all that, I was at least in my head, doing my best in terms of trying to engage and teach students, particularly with not just how to recreate, but beyond recreation, how to be genuinely good people and how to treat others well. And now, and as much as people say, well, you shouldn't think about this, as a father, as a parent, having a almost 3-year-old, his name's Will, his initials are WTF, and I'm proud of that. I'll let everybody smile for a second. And then with the birth of Lillian, it really hit home that in a lot of aspects, just like our teachers growing up, just like parents, we're gatekeepers in terms of information and role modeling in terms of what we're doing. So I've really lately thought about my role within campus recreation and what I'm doing to role model to make sure that the individuals that I have the potential to have influence with can see what behaviors or what we need to do in order for us to better to better handle situations and to help others acclimate to what's going on now. I'm very concerned with how, Will and Lillian are going to grow up. I want to make sure that they understand and see the things that are happening now, and using that as a tool and as a lesson to, hey, this is what happens when these behaviors are seen, and so on and so forth. So my concern right now is translating a lot of that from family to campus recreation, and making sure that what we're teaching and what we're dealing with, especially now with the pandemic, Black Lives Movement, a smattering of things. We got something coming up in November, that kind of thing as well. So making sure that the information is out there and making sure that people are making educated decisions, as well as learning from past situations and trying to better ourselves so that we can attempt to make things better.
And Will, what's going on in your life these days?
Yeah, thanks for the invite, Mark, and good to see so many familiar faces that I definitely missed getting to see in Phoenix this year. Cybbi and Scott definitely hit the nail on the head for a lot of the things that's going through my mind, both personally and professionally. On the personal end, and Scott, I think, actually put something on social yesterday or within the last 24 hours that I'm definitely feeling in terms of working through the excitement or the questions around reopening our university, but also wanting to be with our families. I moved back to Virginia Tech a little over a year ago, and one of the reasons was to be closer to my family and friends at home. And so still trying to work through how much I should see them if I know that I'm working in the office or I'm going to be in the rec center around a lot of students, even though we're taking all the precautions that we can, to be safe and mitigate the spread of COVID-19. And then on the professional side, I get to oversee marketing, events, outreach, and all of that jazz. And our strategies are going to have to change a little bit, especially our traditional ones. So I know we'll talk a good bit about some of the non-traditional strategies, but figuring out how to extend that invitation outside of those large welcome events that we might have, even if we're leaving our rec center to try to meet first-year students where they are. We can't have those, at least in the same way that we did in the past. So working with my events and outreach coordinator on figuring out the best ways to extend that invitation is definitely at the top of what I'm working on.
Wonderful, thank you. And that's interesting when you talk about, that invitation and what we need to do to reach students. I think I was introduced to the idea of invitation about 5 years ago at a Canadian conference, NIRSA conference, by a fellow by the name of Matt Edmonds. And he did a presentation about not only being welcoming, but that inviting aspect as well. And it really got me thinking about, again, what we do to invite students into our space. And that's really where it came to, kudos to Scott for the topic title of The Space to Be Yourself. We're very good at providing information and providing that raw nature of campus rec and the culture of sport and rec. But I've been wondering about where we are failing or being challenged about reaching those other groups that maybe don't feel like they belong in our spaces, and why they don't feel like they belong. And I think, so Raptors, basketball, NBA playoffs start today. I'm going to share a quick personal basketball story. So I've run basketball leagues, intramurals. I was a basketball ref. I ran a city basketball league. I've played my entire life. And because I'm a 5'6", stocky, older gentleman with a little gray, even though I'm confident and I can ball, I can play, I know the game. Every time I enter a new space of basketball, I get anxious and I feel like I don't bring my authentic self right away, because I feel like, oh, okay, I'm going to shoot some threes to show that I can hit that shot. I'm going to, and it's weird. I'm on the other side of 40, and, it's, to still feel that as a rec professional is really weird. And it isn't until, I come in, I feel like I have to fit in. And I'm wondering, that's a lifetime of experience. How does that fit when someone who maybe isn't involved in a sport or an activity, how they feel like they need to fit into the space? Like that idea of people say, well, I got to work out before I can go to the gym so that I look and fit the space. And so when we think about the power of invitation, we know how important the word of mouth is to get people to participate. And again, to use a basketball example, I remember running a 3-on-3 tournament where we had 20 teams registered, where we did all the right things. We had the cool t-shirts made up. We had, signed Raptors gear as prizes. We had a great format. We had 3-point competition, but only 20 people signed up. And what I realized is that it took that personal invitation of myself and staff and others to go to that community and start talking. So I'd go down to the gym watching people play 3-on-3 and say, hey, did you sign up for the 3-on-3 tournament? And the immediate reaction was, well, that's not for me. And finding out why, they were saying, well, we're not good enough, or we're not tall enough, or I can play, but these two can't. And there was just so many reasons where they thought that they weren't fit to play, until it took myself going down there or someone else actually engaging and interacting with them, going, no, you should play. We're to the point where I were connecting people on the court going, hey, you guys playing? No, and making teams right there on the spot, where now the mindset changed of, oh, yeah, all right, we'll sign up. And that power of that personal invitation is so important, yet we don't put a lot of resources, or my experiences. So I'd like to think, I'd like to hear from you, from the three of you, about how do we use that invitation differently from just that information and education piece to create that sense of belonging? What are some ways that you've done that in either your programs or courses or in life? And, to really shine on Cybbi and Scott, Scott with a group of people has done the Words with Friends tournament, which I'm still waiting for my championship because there's no one to meet me at the top there yet, but also with the Socks of NIRSA, and Cybbi with the movie club. You are really good at using social media about creating that community and inviting others to participate. So why don't you talk about that? And actually, if I can ask the three of you to unmute your mics. So unless you have like a background disruption, like, some dog yelping or child running back and forth, feel free to ask each other questions and engage. All right, I'm going to pick on someone now. All right, well, you start, because this whole conversation started with our conversation.
Yeah. So I think one of the ways that I've embodied this with our team to an extent, and would extend this as something I would encourage people in other departments to do, is when you go out and you are talking to student groups or attempting to listen to others, rather than the focus of what your presentation is here's what we have for you, right? It's more listening to them of what would excite you to stay active. And if that fits our mission and our abilities, how can we seek to serve you? I think so much in marketing strategy goes for lost for the side of listening. And if that's what, we really are here to do, we need to do it in that order, is first listen and try to understand if it fits, our aspirations and our values. We really do need to seek to serve. So just from that top level, I've tried to help flip the script of the way that we present, going more from here's what we have for you and trying to sell, and being more listening focused, because to me, that makes someone feel like they have a voice with us, and maybe they don't have to change their identity every time they set foot in one of our spaces, like you talked about, Marc. And so that's, I think, a great way to extend the invitation that way.
Maybe Scott, jump in.
Cybbi, go ahead.
So,
well, Cybbi, talk about your platform on Twitter. Okay.
Oh my gosh, a nightmare. It's a nightmare.
I know it's a nightmare. I mean, I see half the people that you interact with on Twitter here, and that's the reason I've never met you in person, I don't think, but I think I know quite a bit from our interactions on Twitter. So talk about how you create that invitation through Twitter.
Oh my gosh. I think it really, one of my old coworkers looked through my Twitter, and she hadn't seen Twitter before, and she's like, is this what all Twitter is like? And I told her no, there are some people that are not like this. But it was more of her saying wow, you really found your voice, and you don't, shy away from what you believe in. And that's the truth. And I think Twitter is just a way that I can express that. And I think how we create a supportive space, because there's a lot on the internet and with social media for bullying and people to be mean and spread of misinformation that we've seen a lot with this pandemic. And I think I use it the most to spread light on things that are important to me. And so after doing that through my entire presence with social media, that's kind of how Movie Club happened. If y'all want to join Movie Club, follow me on Twitter @Cybbi. Really good stuff. But at the beginning of Movie Club, we were watching just whatever movie came up, and we voted on it. Our first Movie Club didn't have that many people, but we're growing what that audience looks like. And then when the pandemic happened and the Black Lives Matter movement really started taking off, we decided to steer the Movie Club into a Black Lives Matter series. And so watching movies about anything related to the movement, which has been incredibly impactful in the ways that I've heard people say, like, hey, I watched this movie and I didn't know this about the riots in LA, or I, talked with a racist uncle and now he is kind of saying like, oh, okay, like the policing system does make sense of why it's trash. And so with all of that, I think social media, specifically Twitter, you can see people talking about each other and talking about events. There's a really cool bingo that happens every Thursday that is very silly. Matt knows, and it's just a lot of fun. And I think now more than ever, people need a place to escape and to have bingo on alcoholic drinks or candies or whatever the theme is of the week, or to have a movie club where you are engaging in conversations that are important to you right now, and for movements that should continue to have gasoline on the fire and the pedal to the floor. So I think you really need to find where the interests are coming from. What are things that are important now? So a pickup basketball game right now, maybe not as important because of what's going on, but a movie about the judicial system and things along those lines are maybe something that is a better use of your time and your energy.
So I like the way, you talk, both you and Will talked about, listening to what matters now and how do we do that. But I'm going to argue, and I want Scott to get in here, not argue, but ask you to continue, is because it's just not the content you're providing. It's not just that the fact that you pivoted and had this Black Lives Matter movie club. There's something that you have done and others have done to create that capacity that it built up. And you're right, like anything, it starts off small. And Scott, the same thing with things like the Socks of NIRSA, how that was something that started off at a conference and blossomed and huge to the point where you guys are doing a live show, the seating show and all that. So if the three of you can talk about that, what was it that helped you build that capacity so that you had these participants? It wasn't just your friends and colleagues. It exploded, right? It trickled down, and so that more and more wanted to be a part of what you were providing.
So I think the reason why a lot of the things get popular, especially when it has kind of a grassroots effort, is there's a level of authenticity and a level of energy that is put forth into it where people can see that and say, you know what, that's not being curated just for a specific group. It is out there for everyone. And when you see that authenticity, and I'll go along with Socks and NIRSA, it's crazy because it's just something that you wouldn't think would catch on, but when you put enough energy into it, and you have some authentic thought and you have a positivity toward it, to say, hey, be a part of this. I know it's stupid. I know it's crazy. I know it's a little, it's got this energy. I didn't want to use crazy. It's got this energy that you just don't see anywhere else. People see that and they latch onto that and they say, you know what, that you're right. This does have an energy I haven't seen. It's pretty authentic. I want to be a part of it. I want to do something with this. And then doing little things to make people feel like they are welcome. The selection show or Socks of NIRSA. How many people, or how many times have you ever seen a selection show about ranking a pair of socks 1 through 82, 83, something like that? I'm guessing we're pioneers in terms of that. I don't think that's ever happened. So, but putting forth that effort and having, having a website dedicated to it and having opportunities to vote and people emailing us saying, we think it's rigged. This person got so many votes in the last hour. And I don't think, and it's like, well, how do you know that unless you're keeping track yourself the past hour in terms of that? It's just this opportunity. And now you take that, you look at all the components of that. You look at the energy, you look at the time and the effort put into it. You look at the authenticity, and then you have to say to yourself, okay, I had something here, or we had something here. How do we translate that into campus recreation? What do we do in terms of making that happen? A lot of times, and what I'm seeing, and I'm not knocking marketing, Will, I love you to death. A lot of times, what we're putting out there through marketing is curated and has a specific message, and sometimes you're just marketing to the same people that already come to your facility or already utilize your programs. And now the question becomes, that's great, we can get those people excited about our opportunities, but what about the opportunity, or what about the individuals that don't see what we're doing, or the individuals that want certain types of programming, or just don't feel comfortable? I know a lot of our facilities in campus recreation, especially the newer facilities, are massive. Just seems to have all-inclusive programming and types of machinery and facility workout, but it's also intimidating in terms of you walk up to the front door and you're like, oh my goodness, do I belong here? This is massive, huge, gigantic. And I'm just myself, and I don't want this gigantic thing. And I don't want to, have to go through, and it makes you feel, it intimidates you. It makes you feel like you don't belong there because it's such a massive endeavor and such a massive thing. So now the question is, how do I get the energy, or how do I put out there that this is something that we can help you with? This is something that we feel you could benefit from, and at the same time make it authentic and make them feel like, you know what, they're right, or you know what, I do want to give this a chance. How many times do we look at our numbers in terms of, hey, we had X amount of people come through our facility this year. What percentage of them are one and dones? Like, how many times did somebody come in, work out, like, not for me, and then never came back to the facility? We still count that as, well, got somebody through the door. Our job now is that we got them through the door. How are we going to keep them coming in the door? Or how are we going to keep them engaged in our programming? So it's taking that energy that we had with that particular instance of socks and NIRSA, getting that same energy, getting that same authenticity, and then utilizing that into our programs and utilizing that into our facility, and making as many individuals as we can feel like, you know what, this is something for me. This is an opportunity that I do want to take. And hopefully they enjoy and say, you know what, I want to be a repeat person. I want to come back to this.
Well, Scott, on behalf of marketing at large, I'd like to say thank you for putting me on blast there. I guess my call to action, it's all good. My call to action for you all, based off of what Scott said, would be to take that to your programmers, to your marketing people, whoever, and think about, how do you scale Socks of NIRSA down to your department or your program areas? How do you do those engaging things that really allowed NIRSA members to provide a sense of self-expression through competition, right? That was really what that was a chance for people to show off a pair of socks that meant something to them, or express themselves in a different way. And so think about, and I don't have that answer, maybe we could talk about it, but how do you do that? How do you scale that down, to your campus and your department, in addition to all the great things that you're doing to create healthy and active lifestyles?
I like that idea of that, if I think back, I thought hard about what socks I was going to pick. In fact, I put in 2 because I put a different Twitter account. Well, maybe.
You had a burner account? Wow.
I did. I had my Raptor socks and I had my Canadian socks. And so, but you know, you're right, Will. It really made me think about, oh, they both lost, so don't worry about it. Not enough Canadians in NIRSA to celebrate that. But the idea that, you know, it made me think that that was my authentic self represented in socks. If that's, you know, if that's kind of ridiculous, but it's true, right? And really, Will, you're talking about that power, and that's kind of what this exploration is. I don't think we're going to get the answers, but it wasn't about the brackets, right? It wasn't about the socks. It wasn't about the Black Lives Movie Club and what movie you picked, but it was that, you know, what Scott says is that authenticity and that energy and passion. But how do you convey that in our invitation? So currently our invitation seems to be, like Will said at the beginning, in orientation, right? You try to get this rah, but you know what? Everyone's doing that during orientation. So it's hard to disseminate where I belong when everyone's screaming and yelling at me, do this, you know? And then there's the idea of our, you know, websites and our guidebooks and our social media and our Twitter and TikTok, which I don't understand. And I hope someone will do something for me later on in this conversation. But how do we create that sense of passion and energy and authenticity in those ways? Because I'm not sure we do that all the time. I think it comes back to Scott saying, yeah, we do this, you know, very curated, right? This is what I'm going to post this week, and here's my, as opposed to where's that authenticity and passion?
If I may, someplace that I've started, if you look at me, I'm 43 years old. I'm a white cisgendered male. If I go out and start marketing, I'm going to get a certain group. I know this, right? Where I've started now is with my students. My students ultimately know what is and is not the hot topic in terms of what is currently trending. So, and that includes movements, Black Lives Matter, different opportunities that they see, and ultimately giving them power in the program. I have not programmed any intramurals literally for the last 5 years, and that is because my students are the ones that have taken that over. They have an idea. They know in terms of what our goal should be, and that should be inclusion and bringing everybody to this opportunity for them to participate consistently in an intramural activity. And a lot of the ideas that they have brought, unified sports, having charity tournaments, activities such as goal ball, so including other populations. They're the ones that bring those ideas because they're the ones that are more in tune with what's going on, and they have a pulse on what's going on my campus. So I am just one person, and I'm also the rah-rah person. So it's my job. I get paid the big bucks, thank you, Robert D. Kennedy, 54, for to go out and promote those programs and say, hey, come play. You know, and students know that. They're like, okay, you're an administrator. That's your job to make me come out and do your programs and such. But it's so different whenever students come out and say, you know what, really get into this. We got some awesome things. We've got a unified division in basketball. We want to do this charity tournament that benefits the Ithaca Youth Bureau, which is similar to the Boys and Girls Club of Dorchester, but the Boys and Girls Club, but it's in Ithaca. It does a lot of youth programming. They are the ones that say, you know what, we want goal ball in place. We want to start looking at opportunities for other individuals to be included, and that's just awesome. And giving those students the power to take that over and relinquishing that power yourself. And saying, you know what, I've been in this position long enough. I know how to direct it in a way that's going to, you know, be in line with the university. But I want the students, or I want the people that are going to actually engage to have a voice, and that starts with our student staff.
So when we think about the invitation, though, how do those students know that Campus Rec is open and approachable to those ideas and thoughts? Because if I'm not involved and I'm not part of that social media, what is our role to actively go out and ensure that invitation is being heard in a way that's meaningful, that's accessible, that's diverse, in a way that everyone feels that that Campus Rec is for them?
Well, I guess to what Scott was saying, I think that my two biggest pieces of marketing strategy that I try to implement, whether it's in presentations with NIRSA or in our departments, is building ideas that spread. So Scott just talked about that. You're building ideas that spread. If it's your students and you're leaning on your audience to help create them, it's going to have a lot more social currency and potential to take off if it's coming from them, because they're better represented amongst your population. But then building tribes or communities that'll go spread the word for you. To what Scott said, and I'm not nearly as old as Scott, trying to put you on blast, but still, they're not listening to me either, right? So putting the voice, in our students' hands and allowing them to go do the work for us, it's more authentic, and word of mouth marketing is the best now. It's just a fact. Scamming and spamming with emails and posting flyers on Twitter and stuff like that, it just doesn't work anymore, if it ever did. So creating ideas that spread and then building tribes that spread them, I think is your best shot, at least at trying to get there with the invitation.
I hear you, Will. I think we do use our students in a lot of different ways. I think where we miss a lot of how they spread the word and things like that is how we value them. And it's not even like sending them an email and saying, Cybbi, you did so great, like, thank you so much. We need to pay these students, or in some way show that we're value them to what makes sense to them. And I know now, especially with pandemic, like, paying students is extremely difficult. But that's something that you, at the lowest bar, because it is valuable work, and showing our students that we value them by paying them, I think, goes a long way. And I don't think we can this is what I think of to myself, and this is not Will, because I love you very much, but I think we get lazy in that way of, we expect our students to talk about it if it's good and they enjoy it, but we know those students and they're involved with us in some way already. I think it needs to be more strategic than that. Going to organizations that have open events and things like that, and finding people who are very clearly impactful in that organization, or draw that attention and say, like, hey, what would you, be in a recreational sports? This is what what is something that's important to you now? Because there are students that aren't playing pickup basketball anymore, or even like playing esports. You can't catch everybody that's not in your programs right now by just doing esports, but it needs to be something more intentional and strategic, and finding who those influencers are and seeing how you can get them involved in your department, either by looking at how you can adjust your programming now, or doing something like a sock bracket or a movie club or whatever the case may be. Kind of stemming off of TikTok, and that being a very weird place. There's weird stuff in TikTok, but there are people on that platform that are getting paid to talk about things. And I think that's just the way of life now with our students, especially now. But I read a book sometime this year, I think, What Is Time Anymore? But it talked about students and how the students now are valuing relationships more than they are anything else. And they are also more mindful that, like, their best friend would drop them in a second if they needed something else. It was something along those lines. So I think we need to show the commitment to our students in a lot of different ways, but that is very important to maintain those relationships and not just say, like, hey, thanks for doing this, we're on to our next program now, but, like, keep following us on Twitter. Like, pay the students, invest in them, and it's going to be a return on investment that you can't get anywhere else.
No, I think that's awesome, Cybbi. I mean, because you know, you think about the money spent on marketing and saying, and Will saying, you know, the traditional stuff doesn't work, then why not? Hey, I know I got rid of a guidebook 15 years ago when, you know, when the web was, you know, good enough and we could do that online registration, saying no one was reading the paper, but it was that old school mentality. That was, say, $20,000 worth of printed material that was obsolete the day it was printed because things changed and all that. And then to think about what impact did it have on behaviors, and we would, you know, from our data, it was arguably not much when we got rid of it. And could we, you know, and then taking that money and saying, hey, we're going to get a better return on investment with our student staff. Not only that, oftentimes I would argue that a lot of our ambassadors aren't even trained, right? We just go, well, they're the raw, and let's go. So even then, sending out a group of raw people out into the campus and hoping for the best probably still isn't the way. And I know, you know, one program I can share intentionally that we did was both for the Indigenous and LGBTQ resource centers on campus. We understood that raw wasn't going to work. And so we actually did their orientations for their volunteers and staff with our own staff, who then would sit and do office hours once, you know, only an hour a week, but then be able to engage and have those authentic conversations about, hey, you know, have you heard about us? What, you know, why don't you feel like you belong? And start having those one-on-one conversations. And it seems like a lot of work because it's, you know, maybe in that office hour, you might talk to 1 or 3 students, but the value of that in creating that, you know, tribe idea that where we get that wave of individuals sharing that word of mouth and understanding is so powerful, yet we don't put that intentional resources behind it. Do we train those ambassadors? How many of our student staff have this idea of, hey, if we want these programs to flourish, that you need to be a part of sharing the word? And again, I think compensating them appropriately, but it's everyone's role and it's everyone's job. You know, Will, you talked about getting in front of programmers. It's not just your job as the marketer. Maybe you're the expert and the person who's, you know, being intentional about understanding what TikTok is and how it can be used, but in essence, sharing that knowledge and experience with the programmers, because it's just as much their role to facilitate that invitation for others. Because if they don't, then, you know, Will, you can't be passionate about every single program on campus. Well, actually, you probably could. I couldn't be passionate about every program on campus, but that 3-on-3 basketball tournament flourished because I was passionate. I was going to make it succeed through every way possible. And so that idea of being intentional and putting those resources is so important. And I'm not sure why we don't. Scott, you talked about your student staff. What do you have that in your job descriptions as part of their responsibilities to be a part of that movement and part of that invitation? And also, you know, is there any training involved in that?
So with our training, and obviously it's going to be revamped since we're not all going to be face-to-face, a lot of that training happens at the beginning of the year and throughout the year as well. So having those weekly meetings and talking to our coordinators and our supervisors about you're not just, you know, you're getting a paycheck, obviously. But also, I want you to be a part of this and take pride in this and have a little bit of, actually have a lot of stock in this and take a lot of stake in this. What I found is that when that happens, when that occurs, when you have those discussions about ambassadorship and what it means to be an ambassador, not just as somebody that's going to blindly tell you, hey, this program's great. It's those offline moments where they're at a party or they're hanging out with other friends, and you know, somebody brings that up to them and says, hey, you know, what's the deal with this? And they authentically say, hey, this is pretty awesome. This is what we do. You know, we're pretty proud of the fact that we raised $1,000 our first time through with a charity tournament for 5-on-5 basketball. And having them authentically talk about that and not have canned responses. So giving them the ideas, or, you know, talking to them about why do you have this feeling, or why do you positively support campus recreation? What are some things that you don't like about campus recreation? And having those honest discussions, and allowing them to develop those thoughts further, so that when they do have those discussions about campus rec with students, whether it's online or offline, they give authentic answers. And frankly, students are more comfortable with students in terms of talking about this stuff than they are with professionals. Again, there's just this delineation, or this hierarchy, where as they climb up and they're starting to talk to professional staff members. There might be a few students that are pretty honest, but at the same time, there are a lot of students that I've met that are like, well, I think you're doing a good job. And then like, oh, I don't see you very often. If we're doing a great job, or if we're doing a good job, why are we not seeing you back here? What are some things? And I'm finding, talking with my students and having that opportunity to use them as individuals to reach out, they come back and they give me a lot more information than I would have ever gleaned from any other person. And they say, Scott, we've seen this, or there are a lot of students or a lot of people from these groups that have said, we don't really see this type of programming, we're not interested in it. And so now that's on me, and that's on our department to say, okay, we're not as inclusive as we think we are. We need to work on this. How do we work on this, and how do we incorporate this and get this going? And at some point, it has to stop being talking, and it has to stop being discussion, and it has to move forward. It has to happen. And so we have to figure out those ways to move it forward. So, and what's great about working with students too is they have a lot of ideas about moving things forward and how to move those forward, and do it in such a way that engages those populations, so that we see them come through the door, or we see them participate with the programming, and not just come through the door, stay with it and are retained within our programming.
So when I think about, when we look at, how are we inviting groups that don't fit that traditional white cisgender sport fitness culture, right? That's kind of one of the target areas that we're looking about how we can be more inclusive. So how do we do that? How do we create that sense of belonging in our program descriptions and facility designs and marketing strategies, all of that, to show them that Campus Rec is a place, is a space where they can be themselves and be their authentic selves. And, so there's that big picture strategy, which starts, with, directors and VPs and all that to say, hey, we need to do a better job. But then there's also at the coordinator level and student leader level where we can create that systemic change. And I think one of the really key aspects is that not only how do we act, because we do need to act, but the other is we can't be the expert on it all. And so how are we creating an invitation where we're allowing students and groups to come in and co-create these experiences with us, because then that creates that synergy, that they have that passion and that energy that we may not have, because I don't have, I don't live that identity, I don't have that lived experience, but how can we share that co-creation aspect? Because I think that's how a lot of the invitation comes in, because they come in and they, esports is a great example. Was, it didn't come up that someone just said, oh, we want to do esports and let's program at them. There was groups that started saying, hey, how come you don't have esports? You have this, and it starts to kind of move into our territories. And then we start having the discussion about, well, how do we do esports? Is this important? And, that's where now we're reacting. So how can we be less reactionary and more proactive and creating those co-creative spaces for these groups?
To me, it seems like if there's a mutual understanding created that we as the campus recreation department are not using students just to check off boxes that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, but we are creating a space that we want to be able to help them be their true selves and be able to grow and change through the resources that we can provide, whether we have them now or we're seeking to serve them through adding things or doing things for them. That just seems like the base to me. is if we can create that mutual understanding with those groups by going out and listening, by showcasing that we are being our true authentic selves and showing up time and time again and proving that, that hopefully that word would spread to others, that they feel like they can have that voice with us. That would be the start for me.
Cybbi, any thoughts?
I think this is always a challenging topic because it's we're creating more work, or we see it as like another area where we have to do more when we're already pushed at our limits. So there's a selfish side of me of like, what are some things that interest me that'll help motivate me to either like create this different program or how we can get others involved. And have found some success in that way. I really love movies, and at previous institutions, I would, like college towns always have like $5 movies or something like that. And one time it'll be like all the women on my staff, like we'll go watch a movie and talk about it afterwards. Or it's a lot about going to the students, yes, and listening to them, yes. But as any like, even like politician, you are asked, you know, what matters to you, what needs to be fixed, or how can we do better? And you listen to them, and then the ball's in your court. Either we do something about it and work on it, or it's just going to be another thing of like lip service pretty much. And you say that you went and talked to this group and they, you know, they don't even know where to start. And so I think a lot of it is finding what they're passionate about and it's top of mind for them. Because no matter if you graduated however many years ago, or if you are just not connected with students at all, or you're not on TikTok, I think you're always at a part of disconnect in some way. And so finding what is important to them. So if Black Lives Matter is important to them and it's hard for you to talk about, or you find it challenging, I would encourage you to think about like, what do you like to do? What makes you motivated? How are you passionate? And see how you can intertwine both of those things. And maybe create something out of that together. But the students absolutely have to be a part of every step of the conversation. And it's not necessarily just sending out a survey and gathering that information and then doing what you think is best. It's having a student in the room, having somebody represented in that room every single step of the way. So I agree with Will of going and talking to people and getting them involved, but it cannot stop at that. You have to really invest into it, because if you don't, it's going to be trash. And if it comes at a point where you need resources, or your time as a resource is being stretched too thin, I think it's then you having to be an advocate for that program or for those group of students, and saying to your leadership, if this is important for our department, resources need to come somewhere. So if it's hiring more student staff or being able to pay your students in some way, I wish I could tell younger Cybbi that in a lot of ways, of really taking your advocacy for students in such a more direct and a next level approach of, if this is important for our department, then we need resources.
And I think part of that too is looking at where we put other resources to, maybe they don't need that much attention. So, and not to, you know, when I think about the marketing resources, is saying, hey, we don't need to put money into a guidebook. We need to put that money into marketing of having ambassadors and having those things. And so, you know, when you say you're overworked, this is another thing. Well, I'm a firm believer, sometimes things need to drop off, but we often don't re-look at past initiatives and resources. Like, well, we don't want to get rid of it because then we'll lose it, instead of saying, well, how can we shift this into meet our newer priorities, and maybe these aren't so much. And so, you know, I conscious of time that we're running out, the probably the biggest question that I want to know, and this really started from my conversation with Will, was how do we know our invitations are working? You know, we can plaster all this stuff out. So how do we measure success outside of things like likes and shares? Because this started with me asking Will, going, okay, so you got 100 likes. It doesn't mean it changed any behaviors whatsoever. Either they were already participating, or they liked it, but still doesn't mean they came because they were entertained. And, you know, I think of TikTok is, I'm entertained by TikTok. I don't know that TikTok influences my behavior. Maybe it does. Maybe I'm not the target market, and I'm older than Scott. So, so how do we know our invitations are working, Will?
we could have a whole other hour on this one, couldn't we? 'Cause we did when we talked, at least. It's a great question. It's something that I wish, to what Cybbi was saying earlier, I wish I could have told younger Will this, when I was trying to figure it out in the field. But marketing is so much more than making, right? It's so much more than making that social media post or making that flyer. It's about making change and creating change. And some easy ways to do that. I mean, on the marketing side, there are a lot of analytics on social, more than likes and comments, right? If you're looking at direct messages, saves, things like that, that's sort of next level in terms of people are making the next effort to try to learn more or to tell others about what you're doing, which is what we've been talking about this whole time, right? There's other ways to measure that, such as tracking analytics for conversions, not just engagement, but like, are you creating a place that's evangelistic for people to be able to tell others about what you're doing, or to click on your website to be able to register, right? Things like that when you're tracking for registrations. The last thing that's probably the most inclusive for everyone to be able to do here is just to seek stories, seek the qualitative, right? Like, talk to people that are interacting with your stuff on social and ask about how or if you are creating change in their lives, and share that, right? Again, to what we've been talking about this whole time, stories, that's how students are going to connect. They're going to connect with stories about other students and people that they can connect with, not from me or Scott, right, telling them what to do or what's important. So I would say, in a very quick nutshell, where we could go on for an hour, those would be a few ways.
Maybe we will. Maybe that's in the next one. This one really was about reflecting and exploring, but if people are interested, we can think about something that's more direct about that intentionality, some things that work and don't work, how to measure all that. Because oftentimes when I had a marketing manager, they would just report to me, "Oh, we had this many hits," and I would ask, "So what?" And, well, you don't know. So that was their answer, which really prompted me to talk to you, Will, about, okay, well, let me know, what does that mean and how does that translate?
Sure.
Any last thoughts from my NIRSA friends here about just maybe feedback or thoughts that you would give the attendees here about again how to create that authentic invitation?
I appreciate you opening up the opportunity for us to have this conversation, Marc. I think Cybbi kind of spoke to it earlier. If this was easy, we wouldn't be here talking about it, trying to figure it out, right? And so I don't want this conversation to end without me saying, like, I don't have it figured out, right? We're all trying to figure this out together. So I appreciate you creating this space for us to be able to talk through some ways that we've been successful with it as we're trying to figure it out together.
I agree. Yeah. I think as much as we talk about numbers, and if that's what your department needs, great, but we can't treat our students like numbers, right? There's a huge piece of relationship building, and I think if you go down that tunnel, it gets really challenging to make that authentic space. So I challenge all of y'all to think about that, of how you can steer away from the language of a number or whatever the case may be, and how you can create impactful relationships, even if it is with just one student. I think that in turn has that person talking about their experience, which y'all know that effect.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you too, and just basically just taking a look at identifying barriers. What's the reason why someone is not participating in your programming, and doing as much barrier identification as possible, trying to work through those, whether it's something on a personal level, it's something on a departmental level, it's something at staff level, just doing that analysis and saying, hey, what's keeping us from being what we could potentially be, and doing that analysis and working toward that.
I like that idea about the barriers too, because then that becomes part of the invitation, that we address those barriers so that it's part of how we're engaging and informing. So that's wonderful. Well, thank you, Scott, Will, and Cybbi. This has been wonderful. I'm excited to continue our engagement on social media. Well, just Twitter for me. And thank you, everyone, for attending today. Next week will be the last of the official series. We may look at doing some more if people have some thoughts or feedbacks, or want to be a guest and be a NIRSA friend on one of these. But we'll be looking at what NIRSA and our field looks like in the future. You know, what do we need to do to achieve the future that we want within our field, and our we have some great guests with Stan Shingles, Rochelle Williams, and Candace, and I apologize, I forgot her last name, but we'll be advertising that soon. But thank you so much for everyone attending. Thank you, Scott, Will, and Cybbi, and we'll hopefully see you next week. But have a safe and wonderful week ahead. Continue the great work and keep inviting everyone into your spaces.